in this session, the session's topic is glimpses of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's thoughts. Glimpses of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's thoughts. And the chairperson for this is Kevin Brown, a very spirited person, professor of international law, Indiana University, USA. May I call upon Mr. Kevin Brown? Please come on the dais.
Greetings. It is certainly a great honor for me to be here today and share in this celebration of Dr. Ambedkar's 125th birthday celebration. I would like to thank the government of Maharashtra, the Minister of Social Justice, Rajkumar Bandale, for giving me this opportunity, and the organizers of the conference. I have the privilege of sharing the stage with two of my very good friends, Dr. Ramaya and Dr. Jagdan. The title of my remarks are going to be in praise of Dr. Ambedkar from the African American community. As you know, I'm an African American, and I've long been coming to India. I first started coming here 20 years ago. It was at that first visit that I first became familiar with Dr. Ambedkar. The conditions in your country were a lot different 20 years ago than they are today. I've seen the demands for social justice and equality of Dalits increase significantly over that time. And while Dr. Ambedkar was highly regarded 20 years ago, I watched over the past 2 decades as India has more and more come to embrace his great intellect and to appreciate his contributions to this country. Indeed, this celebration of his 125th anniversary of his birthday stands as a testament to Dr. Ambedkar's heightened stature. He reminds me very much of what I have seen happen in the United States with our Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Ambedkar was a leader of the mass movement of Dalits. He led the conversion of 600,000 Dalits in Nagpur on October 14, 1956. And just as a side note, my birthday is October 13, 1956. So because of the time difference, at the same time that Dalits were converting to Buddhism here, I was being born there. As Dr. Ambedkar has risen in his popularity, I've seen the same with our Martin Luther King Jr. In 1968, Dr. King was assassinated, and the first efforts to create a national holiday out of his birthday occurred 3 years later. We delivered a petition with 3 million signatures to Congress. But in 1971, Congress all but ignored those petitions. Indeed, we had to work to heighten the understanding of Dr. King, not only to African Americans, but to American society, before we could convince our Congress to make his birthday a national holiday. That's a process that took 12 years, but finally in 1983, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday became a national holiday. So over the past 33 years, as we have celebrated Dr. King's birthday, we've seen his stature in the United States increase every year. And I suspect that's what you'll see here in India with respect to Dr. Ambedkar. But Dr. Ambedkar was more than just a political leader of the mass movement of Dalits. As a law professor, I first noted that Dr. Ambedkar was the chair of the drafting committee of the Constitution of India. The Constitution, of course, of a country sets out its governing framework, including the basic structure of the rights and responsibilities of its citizens and the duties and obligations of the government to those citizens. The Constitution of India banned the practice of untouchability, and it also provided a framework for reservations in government employment and higher education. But as both Dalits and African Americans know, putting words in a constitution does not ascribe its corresponding feelings in the human heart. In 1868, the U.S. Constitution was amended to both make black people citizens of the United States and to grant us equal protection of the law. Yet we, like you, continue to struggle and work to make the words of our Constitution a living reality. While being chair of the drafting committee does not mean that you get to control what goes into the Constitution, it does demonstrate to all people for all time the high regard that you were held in your own time. And even though India may not have lived up to everything that's in its Constitution, the Constitution of India was truly an amazing document. It included principles of equality that were far ahead of where other governments were at that time, including provisions for women and for universal adult suffrage. So in doing this, that Constitution clearly reflects the significant influence of Dr. Ambedkar. Now, needless to say, at the time the U.S. Constitution was drafted in the 1780s, 90% of my people were held as chattel slaves. And indeed, in 1868, when our Constitution was amended to add its equality principles, no blacks participated in that process. Thus, we don't have a person who worked on our Constitution. Those African Americans who are in the know would consider Thurgood Marshall to be the greatest African American lawyer of all time. He was the head of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People's Legal Defense Fund. And the Legal Defense Fund is without question the most important legal organization that has advanced the legal rights of blacks in the history of the United States. Under Thurgood Marshall's direction, this organization brought about the end of legal segregation in the United States. And after leaving the Legal Defense Fund, Thurgood Marshall became the first African American to be on the U.S. Supreme Court. His writings and his views about major aspects of American law, such as affirmative action, discrimination, and the criminal justice system, are still read by lawyers and law students all over our country. So when I think of Dr. Ambedkar as a lawyer, I think of our Thurgood Marshall. But as you know, Dr. Ambedkar was more than the leader of a mass movement and more than a lawyer. He was also a major intellectual figure. I have read and reread his writings for the past 20 years now, and I must say I find it almost impossible to believe that someone could have so clearly understood Dalit oppression and its causes as well as he did that long ago. Now, we as African Americans have produced several intellectual leaders who have rationally and thoroughly pointed out the irrationality and faulty logic of the dominant systems of thought that have kept our people oppressed and subordinated. During our time of chattel slavery, for example, Frederick Douglass would have been our most prodigious intellect. He clearly pointed out the faulty reasoning of white slave masters who used this reasoning to justify holding my people in bondage. And when Dr. Ambedkar showed his disdain for the Hindu legal code by burning a copy of Manusmriti in 1927, or when he defiantly declared, "I may have been born a Hindu, but I will not die a Hindu," this is very reminiscent of our Frederick Douglass. Our Frederick Douglass delivered a speech on July 4th, 1852, in celebration of the independence of the United States at a time when most African Americans were held as slaves. Douglass had been asked on that occasion to address the question, what does the celebration of independence on July 4th mean to African Americans? And his response to the white audience that he addressed that day was that your July 4th day of independence means to us a day that reveals to us more than any other day in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which we are constant victims. To us, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty and unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, and your shouts of liberty and equality are hollow mockery. And Dr. Ambedkar's famous Annihilation of Caste reminds me of the first major writing by an African American attacking slavery and urging us as blacks to overthrow our bonds by any means necessary. And that was contained in the words of an 1831 article written by R. David Walker and entitled Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, but particularly and very expressly to those in the United States of America. After slavery, our people found ourselves oppressed by a new system, segregation. And you heard this morning Dr. Yogesh Varadi refer to R.W.B. Du Bois as our major intellect of that time of segregation. Dr. Du Bois is still thought of as the single greatest intellect that we as African Americans have ever produced. Du Bois was the first black to graduate from Harvard University with a PhD. He was one of the founders of our greatest civil rights organizations. Dr. Du Bois created the Crisis magazine, which was the leading publication that relentlessly critiqued our racial domination during the era of de jure segregation for decades. Dr. Du Bois, even as Yogesh noted this morning, even corresponded with Dr. Ambedkar. Indeed, Ambedkar wrote to Du Bois that I have been a student of the Negro problem and that there is also much similarity between the position of Dalits in India and the position of Negroes in America, and that the study of the latter is not only natural, but necessary. In a letter dated July 31st, 1946, Du Bois responded to Ambedkar by saying, "Yes, I am familiar with your name and have every sympathy with the untouchables of India." Thus, when I think of Dr. Ambedkar as a major intellect, I think of R. Frederick Douglass, David Walker, and W.B. Du Bois combined. But Dr. Ambedkar was more than the leader of a mass movement of Dalits, a lawyer and an intellect. He was also a politician. It was Dr. Ambedkar who represented the interest of Dalits at the roundtable discussion with the British regarding Indian independence. And as you all know, many Dalit political parties have their roots in the Scheduled Caste Federation, a political party dedicated to advocating for the rights of Dalits that was founded by Dr. Ambedkar. While clearly for us as African Americans, Barack Obama is the most successful politician that we have ever produced. But one of our problems with producing one of our own as a president is that he's not the president of Black America, but America writ large. So if I were to think of the greatest African American politician who represented only our interest, I would point to Reverend Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson's 1984 run for the presidency brought African Americans into the political process in ways that we had never participated before. So when I think of Dr. Ambedkar as a political figure, I would compare him with our Jesse Jackson. But once again, Dr. Ambedkar was more than just the leader of a mass movement, a lawyer, an intellect, and a politician. He was also a great religious thinker. Ambedkar knew that Hinduism was the religion that oppressed his people, and that it would be impossible to overcome Dalit oppression within Hindu religion. As a consequence, he developed a version of Buddhism that comes out of the Dalit experience and responds to the needs of Dalits. Indeed, it is a new path within Buddhism that is truly rational and deeply embedded in the desires to improve society that all of us are living in. Well, we as African Americans have had religious men who have created a version of Christianity. As a religious figure, I would analogize Dr. Ambedkar most to our Elijah Muhammad, the founder of the Nation of Islam, and his most famous protege, Malcolm X. The Nation of Islam argued that Christianity was the religion of the white slave masters and oppressors, and thus our liberation could not come from professing the same religion of those who oppressed us. The Nation of Islam, however, does not profess a traditional version of Islam. Rather, the nation created a version of Islam that is born out of the experiences of African Americans. It seeks to provide a religious belief system that will allow us to help obtain our liberation and oppression. So I've titled this talk In Praise of Dr. Ambedkar from African Americans because I wanted to make sure that you knew we as African Americans are brothers and sisters in our struggle against a common foe of oppression and subordination. We feel ourselves to be one with your struggle. While your struggle is of a different source, rooted in society with different beliefs, there are very much common aspects to both of our struggles. So I wanted to convey to you our respect for your Dr. Ambedkar, for truly, he was a remarkable man. When I think of Dr. Ambedkar's contribution to the Dalit struggle, I think about the legendary contributors to the African American struggle. I think about our Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., our Thurgood Marshall, our Frederick Douglass, our David Walker, our W.E.B. Du Bois, our Jesse Jackson, our Elijah Muhammad, and our Malcolm X all rolled into one. And that doesn't even touch on Dr. Ambedkar as an economist. So in conclusion, I'm a law professor. As a law professor, my job is to teach justice to those who are my law students. In my almost 30 years of teaching law, I have over 3,000 law students who are practicing. I have law students who are legislators. I have law students who are judges. I have former law students who are major partners in law firms, who are heads of corporations, heads of major non-governmental organizations. So as a teacher of justice, it is incumbent upon me to know the thinking of those philosophical, religious, and political people who have written about justice. Thus, I have read Socrates and Plato, Aristotle and Locke, Hume and Rousseau, Bentham and Marx and Hegel and Heidegger and Ardent and Foucault and Adam Smith and on and on and on. And in my considered opinion, humanity has never produced a more prodigious intellectual than Dr. Ambedkar. And I believe one day the world will come to share your opinion of him. So from the African American community to our brothers and sisters in the struggle against a common foe of oppression and subordination, Jabin.